All right, here we go. Wait, no, hold on, sorry.
Hey everybody, welcome back! I hope you've all been well since we last saw each other. I hope you've been enjoying 2020 so far, at least as much as you can. We made it through the 2010s! This past decade was definitely a decade, to be sure. Not just for the world at large, but, for the music industry. New advances in technology, genre lines becoming all but a blur, the behemoth that is streaming. There's no way I'd be able to cover everything about the 2010s in just one video. So instead I'll be doing two. The first, this one, is my top 10 albums of the 2010s, and the second video will be about what music defined the 2010s. That'll be out in February. For this list, once again, I'll give the disclaimer that these are my 10 favorite records of the decade, but the specific placements are just because I like the list format. I'll also say, we all have different tastes in music. That's what makes these lists so fun, to see other people's tastes and to compare and contrast. The music that impacts each of us can differ wildly over the course of just a year, and when it's instead over the course of 10 years? My point is, some of these picks won't surprise you, some of them will, and just because I do or don't put an album on this list doesn't mean that your experience with it is invalid. And if you'd like to fire off your favorite albums of the decade, feel free to leave them in the comments. Enough delaying. Let's do this. Number 10. Oh, okay. Best albums of the decade. I can do this. Let's you know what? Let's start off with something big. We're gonna start off with something that's gonna wow the people, something everybody was talking about. Oh yeah, come on. I'm pumped. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Okay. That'll work for me too. I can also get really sad. That works too.
Spirit of my silence, I can hear you, but I'm afraid to be near you, and I don't.
When it comes to indie eccentricity, all things go to Sufjan Stevens. Just this decade, he released an album-length EP, a song cycle based on the solar system, a second 5 EP collection of Christmas songs, and 2 contributions to Call Me By Your Name. With all that, it may come as a surprise that he only released 2 studio albums. The first was a 75-minute apocalyptic production showcasing some of his best arrangement work, including a stellar 25-minute closer, and the second was almost the complete opposite. Carrie and Lowell is 44 minutes long, with mostly meager production. Sufjan, guitar, a synth here and there, ample use of reverb. Parts of it were recorded on his iPhone, and you can sometimes hear the air conditioner in the background. I think there are only like 2 instances where the music builds, but this muted approach goes perfectly with the album's main focus, the loss of Sufjan's mother and the complicated relationship they had. And oh my god, does Sufjan speak about this in such specific, gut-punching detail. One minute he'll have you chuckling at a swimming instructor who called him Subaru as a kid, the next he'll be painting the scene as his mother passed, closing with the repeated refrain, "We're all gonna die."
I'm gonna die. You're gonna die. We're all gonna die.
The lyrics and songwriting complement each other so well to create a transfixing account of death, equal parts terrifying and beautiful. Also, the live show is so good. Sufjan does a rendition of Hotline Bling. How can you not love it? Number 9. Yee, and I cannot stress this enough, Ha.
You're my golden hour, the color of the sky. You said my
Ah yes, the queen of my 2018. This channel's first year. If you remember, Golden Hour was my number 1 album of 2018, and if you want my general thoughts on it, go check out my top 10 video from that year. Most of it still holds true. To sum it up, Golden Hour is a testimonial to love in all its totality, brought to life with some of the best country pop recorded this decade. Lyrics detailing the various forms love can take, accompanied by gorgeous writing and production. Speaking of production, the years, or should I say year and a few months, have been very kind to this album's sound. Co-producers Daniel Tashin and Ian Fitchick, along with mix engineer Sean Everett, he's a surprise tool that will pop up later, did a bang-up job with constructing these lush soundscapes where no element in the mix has to battle for attention. Everything sits exactly where it should. I certainly have not been alone in singing this album's praises. It ended up winning Best Album at the Grammys in 2019, giving us this gem of a viral moment, and I was worried after the win that after so much attention, I would start to sour on it, but on my re-listens, it still holds up. All the parts I loved, all the parts that gave me goosebumps, they're still there and they still work. It's not flawless. I can kind of do without Velvet Elvis, to be honest. But for me, it's perfect. Number 8. This is When the Levee Breaks by Led Zeppelin. More specifically, this is the snare drum from When the Levee Breaks by Led Zeppelin. It's one of the most iconic and unique snare sounds in recorded music. Now let's say you wanted to make your snare drum sound like this. One option is you could try to emulate it best as you can, a comparable drum, a similar room with similar acoustics, the right signal processing, etc. The second option would be to outright sample it, but the fees you'd have to pay to license that sample would probably be astronomical. You'd have to be one of the biggest stars to clear that sample, and you'd have to be able to pull off using a famous sample like that, but you'd also have to be motivated by something. Something like revenge towards an unfaithful partner.
You hurt yourself. Try not to hurt yourself.
As the saying goes, when life gives you lemons, crush your cheating husband. And then make an album called Lemonade. An album fueled by bitterness, scorn, and self-doubt, feelings that, for a number of reasons, were brought on by Jay-Z allegedly cheating on Beyonce. Now, do you care about that? I mean, it might have been a big story when the album first dropped, but it doesn't impact me. I don't really care about it. It's other people's personal lives. I don't care. But when I go back and listen to this, a lot of those same emotions that are tied to that story still resonate. The first half communicates that anger beautifully, moving between states of confusion, denial, rage, and dismissal. But as the record progresses, the emotional palette expands, tying this tabloid story to Beyonce's own upbringing and experience as a black woman. By the end, the experience has not only deepened her understanding of herself, but also her love for her husband. There's a common critique that Beyonce, as talented as she is not solely responsible for her music, and that's totally fair. She demonstrates often on this album that she's a great singer, but she is no lone genius. Of course not. Let's take a look at this team then. James Blake, The Weeknd, Kendrick Lamar, Jack White, Mike Dean, Sway Lee, Diplo, John Bryan, heck, hold up credits Karen O, Ezra Koenig, Father John Misty, and Soulja Boy. Though I should say, the reason why Karen Owen and Soulja Boy are listed as writers is because they have songs that had similar melodies to Hold Up, and Beyonce's lawyers didn't want to risk getting sued over a song that sounded vaguely like another, because that's a thing that can happen now. Thanks, Blurred Lines. Beyonce surrounded herself with a cavalcade of talent to realize this vision, and the result is a project that moves deftly between genres. I would straight up lay my life down for the bass line on All Night. Number 7. The 2010s were often marked by a looming feeling of malaise, and The National were the band who captured it most effectively. Their 2010 album High Violet was the record that got them fully into the mainstream. Trouble Will Find Me refined that formula to a T, but for my money, Sleep Well Beast was their best of the decade, and the one that showed what they were truly capable of. Don't get me wrong, each song on here absolutely sounds like a national song, especially wrecking balls like Day I Die and Turtleneck. But what makes this record special is its willingness to go outside the band's comfort zone and throw more influences and textures into their process. That's right, this is their experimental album. Which is to say, it's the one where they added a bunch more electronic elements. However, instead of letting the electronics overwhelm them, the band showed they are capable of letting their traditional and experimental sides coexist peacefully. Subtle horn punctuations on Guilty Party, the overblown snare compression on I'll Still Destroy You, the pitch-shifted Karl Rove quote on Walk It Back, and it certainly doesn't hurt that these songs are some of the best the band's ever written. The Desner's compositional work, Brian Devendorf's drumming, Matt Berninger's musings on maintaining a marriage in the face of hardship, everything that makes the band great is on full display here. What other band can pull off lines about anonymous castrati singing from the trees? Number 6. If there's any common factor that ties all of these albums together, it's that they relish in the fact that they're albums. Their creators know that they have the opportunity to go into a studio and throw everything they can at the wall, and they seize it. And sometimes they might even break the wall a bit. Case in point.
It might be over soon.
Justin Vernon broke onto the scene with an album that captured the isolation and confusion that can follow a breakup, and in 2016 he made a masterpiece, 22 a Million, from those very same feelings. An album that, right from its cover, gives you this feeling of, What the heck is going on? The word that comes to mind with this album is antagonistic. The production often plays with your expectations of how recorded music should be presented. I gotta give a shout out to producer Chris Messina, who literally built his own processing software called the Messina, and the album sound is so in debt to it. You often can't tell what the heck Justin Vernon's even talking about, and that's before he starts layering his vocals on top of one another. Odd drum panning on 33 God, the vocal processing on 22 Oversoon that makes it sound like your headphones are breaking, the choir of 100 saxes on 45, the overblown totality of... Okay, that's another thing. What are these titles? Wait, you think I know? Because I don't. There are times when it feels as if this album just doesn't want to be listened to. But if you give it time, if you start to accept what you're hearing, the album begins to make sense in a perverted way. By attempting to deconstruct preconceived notions of sound and language and symbolism, Justin and his gang managed to create something wholly distressing and alluring. A document of the way stress and anger and isolation can impact your psyche and leave nothing but ruin.
But it harms me, it harms me, it harms me, I'll let it in.
Number 5. Stop me if you've heard this one before. Of course this is on here. You don't just make a video saying a song's the best pop song of the past 20 years and then not include the rest of the album. Runaway With Me is essentially flawless. It's so good, I want to listen to it right now, but I can't because I'm recording this dang video. But please let it be known that Emotion, the album Runaway With Me is from, is also stellar. Jepsen's specialty is songs about the transitional periods of romance, going from strangers to acquaintances, acquaintances to friends, friends to partners, and partners back to strangers. The way Jepsen sings about these transitions is so empathetic, and she's backed by an incredible group of collaborators, including Dev Hynes, Rostam, Sia, and Ariel Reichstad. There is no fluff on this thing. Like, think about that. It's a pop record that doesn't have any fluff on it. Every song on here is either a bop, a banger, or a jam. The story goes that Carly and her team wrote over 80 songs during the Emotion sessions, and that level of quality control is apparent throughout. Let's put it this way, the bonus tracks are good. The B-Sides album is good. I mean, did Carly get in touch with some witch doctor and tell them to call her? Maybe? Number 4. Let me paint the scene. I'm in an Italian restaurant with my family on a Saturday in August. I'm restless because Frank Ocean just put out a very long live stream of him building a staircase. Said live stream had music throughout, which many people assumed was his next album. And it was. But it wasn't the actual follow-up. That was just so he could get out of his record contract with Def Jam. The real record was about to be released in tandem with a bunch of pop-ups selling magazines. This was a weird decade sometimes. As weird as the decade could be though, Frank Ocean seemed like one of the few who was able to ride whatever current the past 10 years were pushing. Now some of you may be surprised that Channel Orange, his debut into the public consciousness, isn't on here. Don't get me wrong, it's quite good. If you're looking for proof that Frank can write a quality song, that album is chock full of them. But did Channel Orange have a deep-voiced chihuahua? No. Thus, Blonde gets this spot. My first listen to Blonde was honestly really off-putting. Frank Ocean writes songs, I thought, but these aren't songs, they're strange fragments and pieces that end abruptly or never seem to go anywhere. He sings an E natural on a song that's in E flat, what's this guy's deal? But like 22 A Million, the more time I gave it, the more sense the album made. What Frank made here was a musical labyrinth, rewarding every repeated listen with more insight and new favorite parts. The production knows when to be sparse like on Solo, and when to blow your damn mind like the synth swells on Nights. The impressionist lyrics work perfectly in tandem with the music to convey Frank's often messy process of learning who he is. The contributions from other artists range from Beyonce's barely audible backing vocals to an entire song delivered by Andre 3000, who gives one of his all-time best performances. Everything coalesces until you're driving on the highway at midnight and bawling your eyes out because White Ferrari hit you just the right way. Number 3. Lost in the Dream is the third studio album by Philadelphia-born rock band The War on Drugs. And I love it. For real, this might be one of my favorite rock albums of the past decade. Is it their best? Please don't make me choose. Well, I guess I've got to choose. Actually, the choice was pretty easy. Lost in the Dream is great, but a deeper understanding was a defining listening experience for me this decade. The album is an ode to musical tinkering, to going into a studio and obsessing over every minor detail, from the influences you pull from to the sound of a hi-hat panned slightly to the right. Without a doubt, this is my favorite sounding record of the decade, and I gotta give props to both bandleader Adam Granduciel and engineer Sean Everett. See, I told you it'd be popping up again. The songs here unfold in a way where different elements hit you at different times. A line about your brother getting played like fire may resonate with you one day, then another one about meeting a man with a broken back will catch your ear the next. The music too, it's built on little pieces that work on their own but add up to form something truly special. The guitar ostinato on Holding On, the little bass lick on In Chains, the quick hi-hat accent on Up All Night. It's honestly taking all my energy to not just gush about all the little parts of this album that I love. There's one song I do need to gush about though, and that's Strangest Thing. The War on Drugs have this knack for making the fourth song on their albums completely knock me out. I made a whole video about Ocean in Between the Waves in 2018, and now I'm gonna humiliate myself talking about this one. The song is this contemplative ballad that manages to sound like a wedding slow dance and a breakup song at the same time. After 2 verses, it starts to build with shimmering synths and organs, and a more impassioned vocal delivery by Adam Granduciel. And you're thinking to yourself, okay, the song's probably just gonna stay at this dynamic level for the rest of its runtime. I'm gonna go make myself some pastrami. Out of nowhere, this guitar shoots in, distorted enough to make your ears perk up, but not enough to drown everything out. And it sounds gorgeous and emotive and powerful, but they're not done yet, Jackson. The main hook comes back in again, and it starts building and building, and then... Do you feel that? Do you feel that warmness welling up inside you? That's the feeling of every single life choice you've ever made becoming validated because they all led you to the point where you heard that guitar. Vibe out for the next minute and a half, cause you earned it! I'm recording this in my car because I don't want to confuse the people who live in my building. Number 2.
Can we get much higher? So high.
Well, I mean, you could be at number 1, but hey, number 2's still pretty high. I don't really know what to say about this one. Oh, I know, let's tempt fate by hovering my hand over the delete channel button and talking about why this album isn't so hot. Jay-Z's on here twice, and neither of his verses are great, especially when he just lists off monsters on Monster. The vocal distortion on Gorgeous is neat at first, but wears out its welcome by the second verse. Hell of a Life, fine, I guess. That one just kind of passes over me. Blame Game is one of my favorites, but there's no way I still listen to all of the outro with Chris Rock. Kanye's got some of the best lines of his career on this, but there are absolutely some duds. This isn't a critique of the music itself, but I bought the vinyl of this a while back, and man, it sounds terrible. The vinyl mix of this is just don't buy this on vinyl. Now you might be asking, Mike, why are you talking about why you don't like an album when you're putting it as number 2 on your top 10 albums of the decade? And there's 2 reasons. One, the good parts of this album, i.e. 95% of it, are so good and so often spoken of that I don't really know what I can add. For real, did any of you who clicked on this video, on this website, on this internet, need to be told that this album is phenomenal, that it represents the creative zenith of Kanye's production, that for possibly the last time in his career, he was able to lyrically bridge the gap between the braggadocious and the humble sides of his psyche, making his overblown and decadent lifestyle seem grounded in emotions all of us could relate to, that the guests bring their absolute A-game most of the time, with some essentially becoming stars outright solely because of their contribution here. All of that seems like old news at this point, and either you know and you agree, or you know and you don't agree. And if somehow you didn't know this album's reputation, I mean, go check out any of the other million videos on Kanye on this website. The second reason is time. Spoiler alert for the rest of this list, but this is the oldest record here, and with it turning 10 years old this year, that brings along baggage. The Kanye that made this album is so far removed from the Kanye of today, and some of these lines,
I'm so appalled, spalled and bald and Donald Trump taking dollars from y'all,
only serve to remind who Kanye is now. And some of you may want to separate the art from the artist. I'm not going to tell you how to listen to this. For me, that would be a valid point, if we weren't talking about Kanye. Part of his brilliance is his ability to combine every facet of his personality, his musicianship, his boldness, his brashness, his bold and brashness, into whatever he does. He makes art that often gains so much from being tied to the artist, and to remove that connection removes what I find so captivating about Kanye in the first place. The way I see it, this record is like a family member. They may frustrate you beyond belief, but it's only because they're so near and dear to you. I'm willing to say that this channel might not be here if it wasn't for this album, and for that, it deserves a spot. Honorable mentions. Okay, before number 1, let's do a bunch of honorable mentions. I'll talk about 10 in some depth, and then I'll rattle off a bunch super quickly. My number 1 record of 2019, which was pretty close to making it on had it not been for Soof. Go check out my top 10 of 2019 video for more thoughts on this one. Some people may prefer lonerism, but for me, Kevin Parker's project peaked when it combined psych rock with some of the best pop hooks of the decade. Every time I see this album in the world, it always steps to my heart. Vampire Weekend's best work. Of course I have to mention Spoon, one of their most consistently excellent albums, and you know that says a lot when it's about one of the most consistently excellent bands to ever exist. There was a time when I thought Lorde was gonna be a one-hit wonder. I was so happy to be proven so wrong. The 2010s saw many artists who had been long dormant finally return, and D'Angelo's return might have been the best. Sugar Daddy is a god-tier track. David Bowie, aided by one of the finest jazz ensembles to be in a recording studio this decade, put out a stark look back at his career and his own mortality, and then died 2 days later. Is that a flex? It's a really morbid flex. This album is responsible for getting Kendrick Lamar on a beat produced by Sophie, and for that I am eternally grateful. One of the most powerful musical statements on police violence, social injustice, and running naked backwards through a field of dick. Famous internet man Neil Cicierega blessed us with a trilogy of deranged yet captivating mashup albums, but if I had to pick one, it would have to be the final installment. Now let's rattle a bunch off. Daft Punk, Random Access Memories. The War on Drugs, Lost in the Dream. The 1975, I Like It When You Sleep For You Are So Beautiful Yet So Unaware of It. Danny Brown, Atrocity Exhibition. Arcade Fire, The Suburbs. Kanye West, Yeezus. Frank Ocean, Channel Orange. Father John Misty, I Love Ya Honey Bear. Sufjan Stevens, The Age of Odds. Kamasi Washington, The Epic. Fiona Apple, The Idler Wheel is Wiser Than the Driver of the Screw and Whipping Cords Will Serve You More Than Ropes Will Ever Do. Yes, I got it. The Midnight, Endless Summer. Lana Del Rey, Norman effing Rockwell. A Tribe Called Quest, We Got It From Here, Thank You For Your Service. Spoon, Transference. Japan Droid, Celebration Rock. Solange, A Seat at the Table. Wolfpack, Thrill of the Arts. Sun Kill Moon, Benji. Now Now, Saved. Paramore, After Laughter. Oh, is that it? I think that's it. Let's finish this off. Number 1. Yeah, there's no point belaboring this. My number 1 album is by Kendrick. Who else was it gonna be?
You motherfucker. You a hoe ass nigga. I don't know why you.
I struggle to think of an album that made my jaw drop more times than Kendrick Lamar's magnum opus, To Pimp a Butterfly. I remember being home for spring break in 2015 and seeing that this album had dropped, but the only place that had it uploaded was Google Play Music. And I bought it on Google Play Music. That's how excited I was for this. And that first listen, Jesus. You know those times when you listen to something or watch something or just make a connection with someone or something and it impacts you so much that you crave the opportunity to experience it again for the first time? That happened to me a handful of times this decade, and To Pimp a Butterfly was one of them. The visceral reactions I had to tracks like For Free, These Walls, All Right, the second half of You, my God. When I got back to school, this record was all that my friends and I could talk about. Aside from my own personal anecdotes though, what's left to say about this? One of the most culturally important records of the decade, yep, that's been said. A defining document of racial injustice towards Black Americans in the 2010s, a time when more and more stories about it were surfacing every day, yep, that's been said. A stunning collection of some of the most talented LA jazz musicians headed by a gifted rapper, yep, that's not news. but I want to talk about it anyway because, oh, this crew is so good. The musicianship on display here is the stuff of legends. Terrace Martin, Thundercat, Kamasi Washington, Robert Glasper, Pharrell, Soundwave, George Clinton, Flying Lotus, a murderer's row of jazz, soul, and funk talent. And of course, it's all led by a rapper and poet who was and continues to be in his lyrical prime. Depending on who you ask, Kendrick made up to 3 classics this decade, and those other 2 albums are great in their own right, but to me, To Pimp a Butterfly was his absolute best and my #1 album of the 2010s. Big surprise there, am I right?
You ain't no king.
Okay, top 10 is done, but we're not done with the 2010s just yet. Like I mentioned at the start, I have a second video on the 2010s that's coming out in February. It's a big one. I've been working on it for a while, but I'm really excited for you all to see it. So yeah, I'm back, and I'll see you all next time.
Every day, it could be